foxes approached cautiously after wolves had finished feeding. Wolverines, rare and elusive predators, took advantage of carcasses scattered across the wilderness. In harsh northern winters, these carcasses often became critical food sources for dozens of species. The presence of wolves was enriching the ecosystem in ways scientists had only partially predicted. Meanwhile, herbivore populations themselves were undergoing an important transformation. Contrary to early fears, wolves did not cause a catastrophic collapse in moose or caribou numbers. Instead, their population stabilized. Before the wolves' return, herbivore numbers had risen far beyond what the ecosystem could sustainably support. Food shortages during harsh winters often caused large die-offs. But with wolves regulating populations, the remaining animals became healthier. Average body weights increased. Disease transmission declined. Calf survival rates improved. The animals that survived predation were often the strongest individuals, reinforcing healthier genetic populations over time. This balance between predator and prey is one of the most fundamental processes in natural ecosystems. Predators remove the weak, the sick, and the vulnerable. In doing so, they strengthen the population as a whole. Within 15 years, long-term monitoring revealed that the boreal wilderness was experiencing one of the most significant biodiversity recoveries ever recorded in a northern ecosystem. Bird diversity increased by over 35% in some regions. Wetland habitats expanded dramatically. Plant species that had been nearly absent returned across thousands of hectares. Even insects, often overlooked in conservation studies, showed measurable population increases as plant communities recovered. The wolves themselves continued spreading across the landscape. Packs established territories that sometimes exceeded 1,000 square kilometers. Each pack played its role in maintaining ecological balance across its domain. But the implications of this massive restoration project extended far beyond a single wilderness. Around the world, ecosystems have lost many of their apex predators. Tigers once roamed across much of Asia. Lions dominated large parts of Africa and the Middle East. Wolves inhabited nearly every continent in the northern hemisphere. Yet over the past 2 centuries, human expansion has removed many of these predators from the landscapes they once shaped. Without them, ecosystems often drift out of balance. Herbivore populations explode. Vegetation declines. Biodiversity suffers. The northern wolf restoration offered a powerful reminder of something scientists are increasingly recognizing. Apex predators are not simply hunters. They are architects of ecosystems. Their presence shapes the behavior of countless species. Their influence cascades through food webs. And their absence can unravel ecological systems that took thousands of years to develop. Today, many conservationists view the return of wolves to northern wilderness areas as one of the most successful ecological restoration projects ever attempted. Forests are recovering. Rivers are stabilizing. Wetlands are expanding. Wildlife diversity is rising. Yet the story also raises a deeper question about humanity's relationship with nature. For centuries, humans believed that removing predators would make landscapes safer and more productive. But time and again, science has revealed that nature's systems are far more complex than they appear. Sometimes, removing a single species can disrupt an entire world. And sometimes, restoring that species can heal it. Across the silent forests of the north, wolves continue to move through the snow, their tracks weaving through valleys, forests, and frozen rivers. They hunt. They travel. They raise new generations beneath the northern sky, unaware that their presence is quietly reshaping the wilderness around them. The forests grow taller. Rivers flow clearer. Life returns to places long forgotten. All because a predator came home. And perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is not what the wolves did, but what the ecosystem remembered how to do once they returned. Which leads to one final question. If the return of a single predator can restore an entire wilderness, what other ecosystems around the world might still be waiting for their missing guardians to come back? In the far northern wilderness, where endless forests stretch beyond the horizon and rivers carve silent paths through ancient valleys, something extraordinary once occurred. An event so unusual that even experienced ecologists struggle to predict its consequences. Across millions of hectares of remote boreal forest, scientists released an animal that had once ruled this landscape, but had been missing for generations. The gray wolf. Not dozens, not hundreds, but nearly 10,000 wolves reintroduced across a vast northern wilderness the size of several small countries combined. Aircraft carried them. Conservation teams tracked them. And satellite collars began transmitting their movements across thousands of kilometers of untouched terrain. At first, the landscape remained quiet. But within only a few years, researchers began noticing something that none of them had anticipated. The wilderness itself was beginning to change. Rivers altered their paths. Vegetation spread in unexpected places. Entire animal populations rose and fell. And in ways that still surprise scientists today, the reintroduction of a single predator had triggered one of the most dramatic ecological transformations ever recorded. How could wolves reshape an entire ecosystem? Why would a predator influence forests, rivers, and even the behavior of animals it never hunted? And most importantly, what would happen when 10,000 wolves returned to a landscape that had forgotten them? To understand the scale of this experiment, scientists first had to examine the long history of the northern wilderness itself. For thousands of years, the boreal forests of the north had functioned as one of the most stable ecosystems on Earth. Stretching across regions of Canada, Alaska, Scandinavia, and northern Russia, these forests formed the largest continuous land biome on the planet. Over 1.5 billion hectares of spruce, pine, and larch dominate this cold and rugged terrain. Winter temperatures routinely fall below -30 degrees Celsius, while summer brings short bursts of warmth and life. Despite the harsh climate, the boreal forest supports an astonishing diversity of wildlife. Moose roam the wetlands. Caribou migrate across tundra and forest boundaries. Beavers engineer wetlands and slow-moving streams. Wolverines patrol vast territories. And for millennia, wolves served as the ecosystem's apex predator. In these northern environments, wolves performed a critical ecological function. They controlled the populations of large herbivores such as elk, moose, and caribou. By regulating these animals, wolves indirectly shaped the entire landscape. This process is known as a trophic cascade, a chain reaction in which predators influence not only their prey, but the vegetation and geography of the ecosystem itself. Yet by the early 20th century, this ancient balance had been disrupted. Across large regions of the northern wilderness, wolves were systematically removed. Governments feared that wolves threatened livestock and competed with hunters for game animals. Large-scale eradication campaigns began. Poison baits were scattered across forests. Trappers were paid for every wolf pelt. Aircraft were even used to track and eliminate entire packs. By the 1950s, wolves had disappeared from many areas where they had once thrived for thousands of years. At first, the consequences seemed positive. Populations of large herbivores surged. Moose, elk, and deer multiplied rapidly. Hunters enjoyed abundant game. But within a few decades, scientists began to notice troubling patterns emerging across the landscape. Without wolves to regulate them, herbivore populations began growing far beyond the ecosystem's natural limits. In some regions, moose densities increased by over 300%. At first glance, more animals appeared to be a success story. But the forests were beginning to suffer. Young trees and shrubs, especially willow, birch, and aspen, were being consumed faster than they could regenerate. Wetland vegetation vanished. Riverbanks became bare. And in certain valleys, the once thick undergrowth disappeared almost entirely. Ecologists began documenting a phenomenon known as overbrowsing. Large herbivores were stripping vegetation faster than the ecosystem could recover. Saplings rarely survived long enough to mature. Entire plant communities collapsed. With the vegetation disappearing, other species began to decline as well. Songbirds lost nesting habitats. Small mammals lost protective cover. Even insects dependent on certain plants began to vanish. The consequences extended even further. Without stabilizing vegetation along riverbanks, soil erosion increased dramatically. Streams widened. Sediment filled waterways. Fish spawning habitats were damaged. Beaver populations, once thriving ecosystem engineers, began to decline as their preferred willow and poplar trees disappeared. Within only a few decades, vast regions of northern forest had entered ecological imbalance. What had once been a carefully balanced system was slowly unraveling. Yet for many years the idea of bringing wolves back remained controversial. Farmers feared livestock losses. Hunters worried about competition for game animals. And policymakers hesitated to release large predators into landscapes where humans still lived and worked. But by the late 20th century, ecological science had advanced significantly. Researchers studying predator-prey dynamics began uncovering evidence that apex predators played a far greater role in ecosystems than previously understood. The famous case of Yellowstone National Park, where wolves were reintroduced in 1995, demonstrated how powerful these effects could be. Within only a few years, dramatic ecological changes began unfolding there. Elk behavior shifted. Riverbank vegetation returned. Beaver populations rebounded. And biodiversity began recovering. Scientists realized that predators did far more than simply hunt prey. They changed how prey animals behaved. Herbivores avoided certain valleys, riverbanks, and open areas where predators could attack. These behavioral shifts allowed vegetation to recover in places that had been heavily grazed. Ecologists began referring to this phenomenon as the landscape of fear. Predators reshape ecosystems not only through direct predation, but through the constant pressure their presence creates. These discoveries inspired a bold new conservation idea. If wolves could restore ecological balance in one park, what would happen if they were reintroduced across an entire northern wilderness? The proposal quickly evolved into one of the most ambitious ecological restoration projects ever attempted. Over the course of several years, conservation teams captured wolves from stable populations across multiple northern regions. Carefully selected packs were transported into vast wilderness areas where wolves had been absent for decades. Satellite collars allowed researchers to monitor their movements in real time. Aircraft tracked pack territories. Field biologists documented prey populations and vegetation changes. In total, nearly 10,000 wolves were gradually released across millions of hectares of remote boreal forest. The scale of the intervention was unprecedented. Never before had such a large number of apex predators been deliberately reintroduced across such a vast ecosystem. Public reaction was mixed. Some hailed the project as a groundbreaking step toward ecological restoration. Others warned that releasing thousands of predators could trigger unpredictable consequences. Critics worried that moose and caribou populations might collapse. Ranchers feared livestock losses. Even some scientists questioned whether the ecosystem had changed too much during the wolves' absence. Had the forests already crossed a point of no return? Or could the return of a single predator restore balance to an entire biome? For the first few years, the answer remained unclear. The wolves spread quickly. Satellite tracking revealed packs establishing territories hundreds of kilometers apart. Some migrated across frozen rivers. Others crossed mountain ranges. Within only a few seasons, the wolves had colonized vast areas of forest and tundra. But the most important changes were not immediately visible. At first, the ecosystem appeared largely the same. Moose still roamed wetlands. Caribou still crossed open tundra. Forests remained quiet beneath heavy snowfall. Yet beneath the surface, subtle changes had already begun. Herbivores were moving differently. Moose avoided certain valleys. Caribou shifted their migration routes. And in places where animals once grazed freely, the forest was beginning to grow again. At first, the transformation was almost invisible. A few willow saplings survived along riverbanks. Young birch shoots appeared in areas that had long been barren. Grass and shrubs returned to wetlands once stripped bare by constant grazing. To most observers, these changes seemed insignificant. But to ecologists monitoring the landscape, they signaled something remarkable. The ecosystem was responding. The presence of wolves was beginning to reshape the behavior of every herbivore across the region. And with those behavioral changes, a chain reaction had quietly begun. Within only a few years, researchers started documenting the first signs of an ecological shift that none of them had fully anticipated. Yet the most dramatic transformations were still waiting to unfold. At first, the changes seemed small. Scattered patches of vegetation began appearing in places where none had grown for decades. Along quiet streams and wetlands, young willow and poplar shoots pushed through the soil, their fragile leaves trembling in the northern wind. To an untrained observer, these tiny plants might have appeared insignificant. But to ecologists studying the system,